This next section is on hand rigs. Back to the demo character here and the way I've rigged the hand. You can see once again I've modeled up the palm of the hand with an edit mesh. I'll just turn that off for now so you can see how the bone structure is. This is a basic bone structure for a hand. One main hand bone, a thumb where the first joint is placed correctly down near the wrist. Your index finger, and I place the joint up at the first knuckle. You could actually attach it in and let it bend up and down a little bit as well, but I don't find that as necessary. Same thing with the next two fingers. And the baby finger, I actually add a joint all the way down near the wrist again, and this is because you can cup the palm of your hand by pulling and flexing the palm of your hand because of all the bones that are in your hand. So this helps me be able to do that as well. Now you could just grab and rotate these bones in animation, but that becomes very, very time consuming and difficult to go in and try and select and pick all these bones one at a time. So your average hand rig, and a very solid one, is to just wire or reactor control all of your joint rotations back to a series of sliders or spinners or something. Again, I ran into the problem of this is very time consuming for animating because you have to sit there and slide one at a time, one after the other, to try and get your pose that you want. And you find often that the poses you're going after are poses that you've used over and over and over again from one shot to another. For that reason, I developed an attribute holder. This attribute holder, the pen attribute holder, which is available from download from my site as well as on this DVD in the resources folder, allows you to be able to store poses for the spinners and sliders. In this case, I've stored one called point, and sliding the slider along basically takes you from whatever value the sliders are at currently to whatever value has been stored for that pose. Let go and the slider snaps back. You can also hit reset and it snaps all your hand back to its initial pose. Copy and paste, key all, and it just makes it much, much faster to animate all of these controls for a hand. You'll also notice I've put a separate control object on the back of the hand, and I didn't go and put this modifier on, say, the wrist control. That's because when you pick this object, it will show all the animation tracks for the hand. And when I pick the control for the wrist, it doesn't. If all the hand controls are on the wrist, I'd have a mess of keys for all my hand gestures as well as my overall large arm motions. I separated into two controls to make the animator's life easier in separating the kind of animation that you want. You really don't want your hand animation mixed in with your arm. They tend to be done at different times in different ways. So in this section we're going to discuss how to use the pen attribute holder. Once again, how to build an interface for our hands, connecting spinners and sliders together into a single attribute, and setting up a hand that's able to be posed and get the kind of gestures that you really need for animation. We're going to build the bones for the hand. Once again, I tend to start in the top viewport here. And now I'm going to create the bones first for just one of the fingers. I'm actually going to make the bones a bit smaller too, so they don't stick out too far. And I'm just going to start with an index finger. Getting the joint placement, like in any part of the body, is something you should pay attention to, making sure that it is actually in the right spot to do what you need. I'm going to use the bone edit mode a lot here to be able to place all these bones and get them correct working on a local axis. I often turn off bone edit mode if I want to rotate the entire chain just to get it lined up. Because we're going with straight rotations here, no I-case solvers or anything, we don't need to worry too much about our joints becoming misaligned and being exact, but obviously we want our joints to be in the correct spots and working the way they should. That looks about correct. You shouldn't try and copy things with bone edit mode on as well. What you'll find is you'll get really weird things happening to the bones when you do it. Make sure your bone edit mode is off. What I'm going to do is, now that I've got one chain, I can easily copy it over and place it for the next finger. Making sure it's rotated and on the right axis and following the mesh as closely as possible. Getting any of your joints wrong in a character can cause a lot of problems when you start to animate. I've had people ask me, why doesn't my rig deform properly? And when I look at it, it really has nothing to do with skin or how they've skinned the character. It has to do with the way that they've rigged the character in the first place, and that it just isn't a sound rig. If you notice, once again, our nub bones are becoming misaligned. Again, deleting them and recreating them is a great way of fixing it. So these first three fingers are very similar in the way they're done. Just making sure the joints are in the correct spot and that they're orientated correctly. You really can't go that much wrong with them. Delete that and just recreate that end bone. Do the baby finger next. And in this case, we're going to need a joint that actually goes much further back in the hand. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this joint back first to where it needs to be. And this is going to help us with a cupping action so we can rotate this whole joint down and around the hand a bit. Now we're missing a joint now, so I'm just going to say refine and refine in a new bone. That has to be just about one of my favorite tools in the Max Bones, is being able to refine them on the fly. It can really help make short work. Of getting your bones set up correctly. Now for the thumb joint, something I've noticed a lot is people miss the first joint of the thumb. They actually just don't create it. And if you look at the way your thumb bends, it's no different than a finger. It has 3 joints, not 2, but the first is buried way back in the hand. Without that, you can't actually grab anything. When modeling a hand as well, you have to make sure that you model it correctly. The thumb is not laid flat like the rest of the fingers. If you put your hand flat on a table and look at the direction that your thumb nail points compared to your fingernails, you'll notice it's almost at a 90-degree angle to them, pointing off on an angle. This should be a pretty good start for our bones in the hands. And I'm just going to go in and select them all now. Actually, I think I'll just recreate that nub bone just to make sure it's aligned correctly, just because I'm really picky. I want to pick them all, and because we've been stretching them now, the next thing I'm going to do is press reset stretch just to make sure that the stretch has been reset on them. Linking them is the next thing we need to do. They all just need to be linked up to the hand bone. If anybody's worked with Max's bones for any length of time, you'll know that the length of the bone can start changing. See if I can make this happening by I'll simply link this bone to this one. And I'll reset the stretch on that bone, and you notice it actually skipped a little bit longer. Let me link another one to it. And then reset the stretch on it. It got a little bit longer again. And another one to it, and reset it, and it got a little bit longer again. They can jump and pop in different ways. It's because of the way Max's bones work. In most packages, it would draw a new bone from here down to the base of this bone and allow this bone in between to stretch. Max doesn't do that, so when I pull this around, this bone around, you notice it's actually pulling this bone around as well and moving all the others with it. You can get around this problem. I'm just going to unlink all these, reset the stretch on this bone now. You'll see it goes back to the right length. And now I'm going to create point helpers before I link them together. So I can just simply create a point helper, align it up to the bone, link the bone to the point helper to the hand bone. Now if I reset the stretch in this, it won't happen. This is because this is not a bone. Another way to do it is simply turn off the bone property in the bones, but then you may not want to do that as well. I also have a tool available on my website called mgroup, and it basically mimics kind of the way Maya does some of its grouping methods. And I can go ahead and link all of these joints to the hand bone and then press my hotkey for it. And what it does is it actually creates a point helper at each joint and keeps the hierarchy intact. In this case, it seems to have made them all very, very large. And I'm going to go change their sizes down smaller. Now that we have these point helpers in between the hierarchy, because mgroup, what it does is it actually keeps the hierarchy intact, it just sticks the node in between. If I move this one now, it's not affecting the hand bone, it's not pulling it around. And if I reset the stretch in it, it doesn't affect it either. I use this method a lot in my rigs. This, however, isn't very good if you're in a game situation where you need to keep the number of nodes in a rig down to a minimum. You really can't be adding more and more. In a TV series or in a feature film, adding more nodes isn't necessarily a big problem. It just increases complexity a bit.